Okay, good morning and afternoon and evening to everyone out there. My name is Jeff Nevins. This is the Silvercrest Podcast. So I run our large cap growth and multi-cap growth strategy out of Milwaukee. I'm here in New York right now, but we're going to talk about artificial intelligence or generative AI. And I have with me, and I'm not necessarily the host, we're just having a conversation here, but I have with me Rohan, who's our Chief Technology Officer here at Silvercrest. We're going to come at this from very different perspectives because I'm more on the investor side. I'll let Rohan talk about himself maybe briefly, and then we can kind of get this started.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jeff, for the introduction. I'm Rohan Kalyanpur, Head of Technology here at Silvercrest. I've been here now 10 years, so this is an anniversary of some sorts.
Yes, it is. Podcast on an anniversary. This is
exactly.
Perfect.
And, I think AI is definitely a hot topic now, so I'm glad that we can share ideas, agree to disagree on a few things, and have an active debate. So
absolutely,
I look forward to it. If you don't mind, let me go with my first question.
All right, you can start off with questions, and then I'll hit you with questions. All right, what
Absolutely.
do you got? Yeah.
So, I think everyone, including myself, is curious to hear, since you meet with a lot of large cap firms, a lot of money is pouring into GPUs and technology, and, what are your thoughts? Why is this happening? What are you seeing? What are you hearing from boardrooms, CEOs?
Yes, sure. Well, the short version of why I think there's so many GPUs that are selling out there is FOMO. So what's happening and I've been covering technology for 25 years now, and I'm sure you have a history of being in technology for around the same time. And I have never seen anything so pervasive in terms of from boardrooms to employees, to the CEOs, to the CFOs, to the developers, even from a consumer level, even from a student level. I mean, our children are using ChatGPT. You name it, everybody is talking about AI. And so from the companies that we meet with, what they're trying to do is they're having this FOMO feeling because they're hearing good stories, right? They're hearing stories of, like even United Health has been on record saying that they have 500 AI use cases. There's a host of a bunch of companies like Procter & Gamble. I had this list that I brought with me. Procter & Gamble's talked about saving $200 to $300 million in using AI and cost savings. Walmart's talked about saving money. Match.com, Elevance Health, Amdocs. I mean, there's just list goes on and on of all these companies talking about it. So I think it all comes down to FOMO. But what the interesting part about AI that I think is maybe not as well talked about is, while it is a technology, and you would think that most technology firms are the ones adopting it, i.e. software companies and hardware companies, and there's certainly some of them are benefiting, but a lot of the companies that are tending to talk about AI and seem to have like the most use cases are very highly labor-intensive companies like utilities and healthcare and some consumer like call center operations. And so some of the biggest use cases we hear about, and I'll stop talking here, Rohan, is if you have any questions, or I'd love to get your feedback, is the biggest use cases we hear about is code development when it comes to software development, it's call center operations or anything business process outsourcing, and the other one is advertising because they can just target, whether it's Meta, Facebook, Instagram, whether it's Google, they can just target customers better because the technology is so disruptive.
To a large part, from talking to my own peers within the technology space, I have to agree. Boardrooms, they want the technology heads to come up with an AI strategy. What are we doing for AI? And I completely agree that there's a lot of FOMO, right? I need to do something before competitors do them. But what I also find is there isn't a clear-cut strategy of what needs to be done, right? Let's have an AI strategy, and maybe the AI will solve some problems. But I do agree that with call centers, business processing, there are efficiencies to be had. My own skepticism is those efficiencies could always be had, with call centers or business processes, automation. So I find that it's a fine line or a gray area where people call it AI versus just optimization or efficiency. So I think that's still to be decided in a sense. But I think, yeah, there's definitely a bright future for AI. And I think it remains to be seen what comes out on the other side.
No, and you should be skeptical, right? I mean, you're the CTO, and so any sort of money you decide to invest for our firm, you better get an ROI on that project, right? So what are your peers at all discussing we're seeing ROI here or there, but there's not ROI in this spot? I don't know. Is there any
good
anecdotes?
question. At this point, I'm not sure if people are even considering ROI, right? And that's the thing. They want to get something out there. So the way I think most firms that I'm in touch with are approaching it is, let's set aside some money, let's try something, let's see where we come out. There isn't like, here's a problem I'd like to solve, here's the budget we have for it, and let's use AI to solve it. And I think that's probably because I don't know if there are many use cases of, or even in literature where such use cases have been discussed, where this is a problem that AI solved, this is how much it cost, and this is the savings we have. For example, if Procter & Gamble says we're going to have 300 million in savings, how much are they going to invest to save that money? What if they invest 500 million?
Right? That's a very good point, yeah.
That's the thing, for example, I read an article about how KPMG themselves, they got Copilot across the firm, and they were asked, why did you get it? What benefits did you get? And the answer was just to see what it could do and what AI was about. Because as a firm like KPMG, they need to be able to talk to their clients about AI. So they haven't really seen any benefits or negative side effects, but they just got it in so they could say we have an AI strategy and we want to see what it's about, right? It's really about trying it out.
No,
at this point.
And I would agree with this experimentation phase that we're in, because on different investor trips I've been on, there's been the other consulting firms like obviously Deloitte, Accenture, trying not to get into the exact names, but when we spoke with them, their commentary was about 75, maybe it was 80% of AI cases are experimental, and only, I don't know if the number's 10 or 15 or 20, are actually in production. So it just goes to your point that your skepticism is probably spot on with, the experimentation.
Right.
The only thing that what's interesting is, do you think that this experimental phase that we're in is similar to the internet? A lot of people, at least in my world, in the investment world, like to compare it to the internet, right? In the late 90s and early 2000s, and because we're buying all this stuff, but we don't have business models, or we don't know if anyone's making any money on it. Do you think it's similar? Do you think it's different? What are your thoughts? Because you were around then.
Right. So ironically, my technology career began around the start of the internet age, in a sense, right? So I'm one of the earlier interneters, right? At the time, I recall internet, was getting bigger, but I feel like at the time there were definitely problems that the world was going to solve with the internet. Now I can FaceTime with my family in India, right? That's all enabled by the internet. People can take lessons, music lessons, all online. A Zoom call is all thanks to the internet. The internet solved telephony. You could make phone calls, communicate, watch videos with Netflix. There are so many use cases that made our lives better, and that's what made the internet so amazing. Within AI, I'm not seeing, if I ask someone, can you outline to me 5 problems in the world that the AI is going to solve, I haven't heard a list of 5 problems. And that's my skepticism is, okay, what is AI going to solve for me? And that's where my skepticism comes in, is it's still to be proven. Now, I'm not saying that 5 years from now there'll be all these things that AI does solve. And maybe those solutions are for on the business side, may not be the consumer side. I'm not sure. But I think that's probably why it's a lot of experimentation that's happening now to see what possibilities exist out there. So maybe we're in the early days, but the amount of capital that's being spent, it's fairly shocking, given that, I haven't seen a great list of these are the problems that we're looking to solve with this investment.
So speaking of the amount of capital spent, I pulled up some numbers. This is what I find fascinating. So I'm going to push back a little bit on your comment that during the in AI versus the internet, we're spending a lot of money, but there's not use cases. Okay, so if there's not use cases, which we are hearing anecdotally that it's more experimentation, we agree on that. But if you look at the dollars spent, so if you go back in the late 90s or mid 90s, so in 1995, Cisco generated about $500 million in sales, to try to build out the internet. Now, there were obviously a lot of other companies involved in the late 90s, but just as one company, for an example, right? It took them almost 10 years, I think it was around year 7 or year 10, to get to $7 billion in sales for all the equipment and all the software and things that they had to build out the internet. $7 billion, okay? So let's put that in context to what's happening today, right? And you know where I'm going with this. NVIDIA, who's sort of the arms race dealer today, they're the Cisco of the 90s, is going to do well over $100 billion. $100 billion, not million, $1 billion in selling these chips for AI. So on one hand, while I agree there's a lot of money being spent, and I agree that there is a lot of experimentation anecdotally, there has to be something real to this because the money being spent is astronomical, right? And the only other thing I'll just throw in, and I'll let you, I would love to hear your feedback, is everyone keeps asking, what's the ROI? And it's sort of like, I don't know, is it offensive to be saying to Microsoft and Google, Meta, not so much NVIDIA, but Tesla and Elon, who always has a lot of ideas. I mean, pick your company. They're the ones buying all these products. If we're saying there's no ROI, it's almost like we're saying the smartest technology geniuses in the United States have no idea what they're doing.
Well,
right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I agree. So the pushback I would have is the market caps of these companies, and they used to be called the Mag 7, whatever Mag now they are. Maybe Elon's unhappy to have left that company, but left the firm of Mag 7.
Right. He's not in the 7 anymore.
The market is giving them a market cap to experiment and do this investment. So they can afford to buy $100 billion because they're worth trillions, right? So I'd be curious to see Cisco and the internet spend compared to the market cap or how much money was poured in from investors versus the money it's invested now compared to the market cap of these firms, right? What's $100 billion for a Microsoft or an Apple, right? Apple probably has that as cash on the balance sheet.
They probably do. I think actually, I know they do.
So it's not as big of a stretch for them to experiment with this stuff. In fact, Apple might feel that they need to catch up.
Yeah.
So again, I think there are use cases, and again, at the moment, these are big companies that are doing this. So to switch gears, let's talk, what would a mid or small size company, what would you say are the bottlenecks for them to also embark on a strategy that involves AI? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I personally think part of the reason why projects have become, they start with ideas, or they start with my friend who's a CTO over there is doing something interesting in AI. Now I got to get my firm to do that, otherwise I'm going to get fired, sort of. Getting back to the FOMO comment we were talking about earlier, it starts with an idea, then they go down the route of, okay, let's call up Azure, AWS, GCP, Oracle Cloud, whoever it is. Let's start renting some GPUs. Here's our idea. The bottleneck and the challenge they have is sometimes they realize their data is not it's not organized appropriately. And in technology speak, it basically just means it's in old databases that you can't query, which means you can't search through it, you can't pull the data out, you can't make sense of it, which it's incredibly important for AI to have clean data to actually do something for it. So I think that's the biggest bottleneck that companies are running into, which is why all these use cases are probably considered experimental, part because they're trying to figure out the use case, but it's also part they might have to take a step back and say, we need a data strategy. I think that's what you you were alluding to. Are you seeing something similar?
Let me start with an anecdote. I recently met with our AWS account manager, and I was just having lunch, and he shared some interesting information because he's talking to all these firms. Whenever a firm has, they want to do something with AI, they, like you said, they call an Accenture, Deloitte or an AWS and say, hey, we have a problem to solve. Can you help us out? And it was interesting to see his feedback because he said a lot of the firms, in fact, he gave me one example where a firm brought him in and they said, we have all this data on real estate dealings and expenses to manage buildings, and we need to help us organize it. But the problem is all of it is in these file cabinets, printed on paper, right?
On paper.
Nothing was centralized in a data store of some sorts where you could use some AI possibly to find efficiencies, right? So what AWS recommended was before you even do anything AI, you need a data strategy. How do we get this information into a central repository that now can be read by a machine versus you have all these papers in multiple offices. It wasn't even in one office, right? So what I'm seeing is, like you said, there is no AI strategy without a data strategy because AI is about analyzing big data. So to me, one of the bottlenecks is, do you have your data in an organized way? Is it good and clean? But also, more importantly, do you have control over it? Many firms of varying sizes have their data in a vendor product, right? It could be a CRM or an accounting system. And those vendor products may not be easy for you to access your own data. You're beholden to this vendor. So now, if the vendor doesn't have an AI strategy, you're stuck without one yourself.
No, well, your anecdote is outstanding, by the way, that someone would go to AWS and just have everything in paper.
Right.
But it's fair because that's probably the situation they're in. They're so desperate. They want to get into AI. So they start reaching out, and they got to take step one, which is probably going to address all the paper and get it into data. So what I've heard is that in terms of companies that have data strategies, there's only about 20%, 15 to 20%, and I'm sure these are just estimates, but if you think about the companies that are, let's call them AI ready, or companies that have some of their data or most of their data, or hopefully the important data in the cloud, it's only 20%. So there's still an enormous amount of companies that are out there that still have to get, and it gets back to that theme. I mean, you know how our themes, at least in my world, in the investment world, they change constantly. Before and during COVID, the big theme was digitally transform or digital transformation. And so it's almost like if you really had to take AI and boil it down to what it's going to continue to push, it's going to continue to push that digital transformation. Especially if you even want to do AI. It doesn't have to be this year or next year. It could be 3 years from now, because it might take that long to get your data into a place where you can do it. And I think this is going off. I'm curious of your. I wanted to bring up kind of a sidebar topic related to this, and it's going back to how we were talking about ROI in the beginning, because I think I can just tell you just from my experience as investors, everyone goes to all these companies. Says, what's the ROI on your GPU, or what's the ROI on this AI product that you have in the market? No public company is really giving us an answer, and we're still very early, so it's fair to they're not going to do that. We may never get the answer. We'll see. What we have heard publicly is at least NVIDIA has said on the pure hosting side of GPUs. So as we all know, there's only 3 to 5 companies that actually have the money. To your point earlier about have these companies that have all this money that can buy the GPUs, and then they host it. And we know that if you spend, at least according to NVIDIA, that they have, if you spend $1 with NVIDIA, you can make $4 to $6 over the next several years in revenue just by renting out that GPU. So at least the hosting of GPUs side, that's a business model, and it is actually a very big driver of it is a driver of some of those big cloud companies. But the question of ROI, maybe that's not the right question. I guess I'd be curious maybe what you think. I was thinking before we had this chat, maybe ROI isn't the right question. Maybe to kind of cut a little, get to the bottom line a little faster would be, since no one's going to answer that question on ROI and everyone has different experiences, is who's going to get disrupted and who's going to actually benefit. I don't know if you have any opinion in terms of, anecdotes and all your peers that you've spoken with. Well, this is what we're trying to figure out on my end. I have some thoughts, but I don't have all the answers.
What I will say is I agree with, and I appreciate you bringing up this point because I should have mentioned earlier, was firms that were not digitized. Now there's a push for everyone to get digitized. So at the very least, I think firms who were not focused on a data strategy at all, at the very least, they're going to get organized, right? So in a positive light, this AI rush is helping firms to kind of get their house in order. And then at some point, whether or not things work out, and maybe it's better to be behind the curve. Get your ducks in a row now. Once we figure out what is going to be the killer app or the great ROI project, you're ready. As opposed to many firms are jumping in now, they may spend the money, kind of like a MySpace versus Facebook, right? MySpace came in, they didn't kill it, but Facebook came in later, and then they maybe did things better than MySpace, and MySpace is now gone. Right. So that's probably could be a positive for firms that are still behind the curve, to give them some hope. But I also that's an interesting perspective about, let's not think of the ROI for a project. From your perspective,
from your standpoint,
from my perspective, I have to think of ROI for initiatives. But I agree. If you kind of step away and look big picture, what is this going to disrupt? And that's a great question. And I think looking at the larger companies like a Microsoft or Apple and seeing what they do, that might give us clues. Or because they have the money to spend, they are going to experiment. The smaller firms are going to have to kind of watch and see, or maybe take a more targeted approach and find something that they want to solve internally. Right. But again, the disruption, that's a great question. Yeah. There's no definitive answer. Again, goes back to skepticism.
It does, because, on one hand, I can say that everyone keeps talking about, this is just one anecdote, but everyone keeps talking about call centers is the biggest place they're going to automate, which I'm sure is part of one of United Health's 500 use cases, right? And we've been talking about automating call centers for 25, 30 years, at least in my experience. It's a customer care center. It's highly labor intensive. It started with speech recognition in the early 2000s. Then we went to IVR systems, which was, where you get stuck in that menu of buttons you have to press. We've done the AI bots, and now you get text messages on your phone, and you can interact with an agent on your phone. We've gone through all these iterations, and maybe the question now is AI actually the killer version that if you're calling into a call, I guess you wouldn't be calling, you'd be interacting with it. Is that actually finally the killer app that can cut out the number of call center agents sitting, which is the most expensive part of their business? So it'll be interesting to see if that's actually will play out. So the use case that seems to be getting the most attention is this Copilot product by Microsoft, which is apparently they've had some number of users that they've been deployed out, and I don't think they're calling it beta, but certainly the first use cases of clients that have it. Have you heard any anecdotes on Copilot? I've heard some, but I'd love to compare notes with you.
I've heard anecdotes. The feedback I've received in general is it is definitely useful for a few things, but a lot of managers are not happy with, or they can't justify the cost for what they're getting out of it. That's one perspective. Another perspective is, as a technology tool, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is, how easy or hard is it to change people's behaviors to use these new tools, right? I might be used to using Excel and Word, and I may be stuck in my ways, to now train me or instruct me to say, use this new tool, and in order to use it most effectively, these are the things you need to do. How easy or hard is it going to be for human behavior to change? Because these tools aren't, as easy as, I'm going to ask a question and here are all my answers. There's going to be some interaction. Click here. Here are some suggestions. So there may be a learning curve, and how many people later or in mid-career are willing to take that step to change their behavior. So that's some of the questions I'm getting, or discussion points.
Yeah, I would agree. The most of the feedback, at least from the investor and Wall Street side, and I can't speak for all of Wall Street. I'm just speaking for myself here, but is that Copilot is being rolled out. It is the feedback is kind of mixed. It's that email has kind of been the easiest one where people can summarize emails, reply to emails. Everybody's kind of talked about that, but you kind of say to yourself, I'm sure if I was a CTO, and I'm sure you would agree, I don't want to pay $20 per user per month so all my employees at the firm can just summarize emails with a chatbot or a AI tool, let's call it. So there's been some mixed feedback. I've heard the Excel features can be really neat, but to your point, there's a learning curve. I mean, most of us have all been on Microsoft Office for, I don't know, how long has that been around? 20, 30 years now?
Probably.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
It was the mid-90s or so. Then it just went to the cloud, essentially. But we've all been using, let's say, if you're an Excel power user or you're a PowerPoint power user, it's going to be hard for me I know it'll be hard, certainly for me, to switch my behavior in Excel because I'm just so used to using it the way I want to use it. But then I have to be completely cognizant of the younger generation, and even my kids or individuals that were in high school and college and started to use ChatGPT. Unfortunately, to help them out with school, right? Then they're used to using these AI features, and so maybe when they pull up Excel for the first time and they see AI in the corner, they're going to be like, "Click, I want that." That was just one thought. The second thought I would have on Copilot is, in technology, the trends I've seen is usually version 1.0, which is what this is usually not very good. And it's usually the second and third version where you actually get a product where everyone's really adopting from a wide scale. So while I think I said Copilot earlier as a poster child, maybe version 2 and version 3 is the real poster child on how things will play out with that. But so that's Copilot. Did you have any other feedback on Copilot?
No, but I agree.
Yeah.
Version 1 might not be great, but
right.
I'm sure they're working. And as they get feedback from firms, because I know a lot of folks I speak to, they have active partnerships with Microsoft. So I'm sure Microsoft's learning, what can we do to make it better. So there should be improvements, and version 2 might be, something much better, we hope.
Right. So what are we doing as a firm, Rohan? I don't, just being on the investment side, I don't always spend a time talking to you, which has been really fun to catch up with you on such a topical item. What have we done as a firm, just in terms of, do we have a data strategy? Are we even prepared?
Right. So I know, like I said, I joined 10 years ago, and I think at the time, Rick, our CEO as well, he had the great foresight to say, one of the reasons or one of my goals with Rick was, as a firm, we need to own our own data. So prior to my joining, our data was all in a vendor product, like I mentioned. So we spent over a year kind of migrating a large chunk of that, all of that data at this point, into a centralized data store. So at this point, we own our own data. We understand how it works. We've enhanced it with input from users, clients, right? So our data is kind of bespoke and represents the firm's thinking and our best ideas. Now we're able to work with a small team to, selectively explore how we can apply a smaller language model to our own data and see what comes of it. I'm sure we're going to get some benefits because, we have all this data. and we have users who would like to ask questions, right? At the very least, it's going to make our internal teams and potentially future clients as well able to interact with the data in a conversational way. And I think that has a lot of value, right? So to answer your question, we are taking, one, we have a good data strategy. We own our own data. And we've embarked on a cautiously optimistic plan to kind of train a model, a smaller size model, on our data and see how it could benefit our users. So yes, we do have an AI strategy, and I'm pretty optimistic that in a year or so we'll have something to work with.
So we have a data strategy. It's data ready. But from an AI standpoint, we are part of the 80% that's in the experimental phase.
Yes, we're experimenting, but we also kind of know what benefits we can get out of it, right? So we're not experimenting in the sense that let's see what happens. We're more about let's build this out so it's able to analyze our data and answer questions that an average user might have. What is the value of a portfolio? When was the last trade I placed? If you had questions like this now, you might have to run a report, ask someone else to look into it within a system. It'll be nice if you can just type in a few sentences and the AI answers your questions, right? So I think we have a more defined ask of the AI in a sense. So I wouldn't say we're experimenting in that, from that perspective. But once we've crossed that hurdle or once we've accomplished that goal, then we might look to see what else is out there in the market and possibly take it to the next step.
Yeah. And how has your experience been with the language model that we use, or the small language model? I assume that's quite a learning curve to get up to speed with, and then you have to wrap compliance. You don't have to get into security and compliance, but I just mean you have to get it to a point where it doesn't hallucinate too much,
right? But
also gives appropriate information.
Right. Great question. So we are working with some outside consultants as well. And, all models now are kind of centrally hosted. So we're using the open AI model. And again, we don't want to be sharing all of our data with some third-party vendor. So what we did was we have a test version of our data at all points in time, right? So we've scrubbed all the very private personal information of our clients. So the AI is really trained more on account codes, not per se the names of who the account belongs to, right? So at this point, we don't need to ask, what's so-and-so's account worth. We just want to say, what's account 5732 worth? That way we know our data is still secure, but we can move forward without disrupting or, kind of risking our clients' data.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Well, it's been great to chat with you. I'm fascinated with sort of your angles of this, and compared to kind of what I hear from just a different side of the world. The crazy thing about AI is it seems to be moving at absolute lightning speed, and it would be fun to catch up. We'll see how much has changed in, I don't even know, 3-6 months.
I think so. I think we're going to see a lot of changes, and maybe for the better. So we should definitely reconvene at some point.
Okay, sounds great, Rohan. Good chatting with you.
You too. Thank you.